Hello and welcome to another Geography Updates video, this one looking at the situation of political instability in the DRC and centred around the M23 group. Now, how many times a day do you look at your phone? 50, 100, 150, maybe more? Now, no matter why, it's unlikely that you stop to contemplate how the phone ended up in your hand. If you chart the supply chain back far enough, first of all to the retail outlet it was purchased from, then to the entry point that it came into the country, the container ship it travelled on, from where it was manufactured, and then you branch out to multiple locations to where the raw materials for each component were sourced. It's likely that you'll eventually find your way back to the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a tantalum mine. There may only be a pea-sized amount of tantalum in your phone, but without it and its ability to store large amounts of energy compared to its size, your phone simply wouldn't work. Over 40% of global supply comes from the DRC, the vast majority of which is sourced from the eastern regions that are the epicenter of the DRC's political instability, which continues to plague the country's ability to transform its latent mineral wealth into economic growth and sustainable development, a country where almost 75% of the population live in extreme poverty. The group at the center of this instability is the M23 movement, a paramilitary organization that has taken control of large swathes of resource-rich territory in North and South Kivu in the east of the country, along the border with Rwanda and Uganda. So who are the M23? To answer that question, you have to go back over 30 years to the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where 800,000 people, mostly ethnic Tutsis, were slaughtered by ethnic Hutu extremists. The current leader of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, eventually led an advanced force of Tutsi rebels to overthrow the Hutus. This triggered the migration of 1 million Hutus across the border into the DRC, fomenting tensions with the Tutsis living in the eastern DRC. Over the last 30 years, there have been both direct and indirect Rwandan incursions into the region to eliminate the Hutu threat, and accusations that the DRC is supporting their enemy. One of the groups seen to be backed by Rwanda is the M23, led by ethnic Tutsis and led by the man on the top right there, Sultani Makanga. They take their name from a peace agreement signed between the DRC and a previous Tutsi rebel group on the 23rd of March 2009, which they now allege has not been respected. The group first gained notoriety in 2012 when they seized Goma, but were ultimately defeated and expelled by a joint Congolese UN force. However, since 2021, M23 have reignited the conflict with particular success in the last 18 months. In April 2024, the Rubaya mining site, which produces 20 to 30% of global coltan supply, was taken by M23. In January 2025, the M23 took Goma, a large city of over 1 million residents and a vital trading hub for precious metals and minerals. In February 2025, the group seized the provincial capital of South Kivu, Bukavu. There was even one point where M23 threatened to target Kinshasa, the nation's capital, 2,600 kilometers away from these eastern regions. Whilst one might trace the instability in the region to multiple factors, such as colonial legacy, where competing ethnic groups were lumped together by European powers who arbitrarily drew national boundaries based on their own needs rather than taking account of the needs of these groups, embedding inevitable future conflict into not just the DRC but many African states, or the consequences of civil wars in other countries spilling over into neighbouring regions. The M23 crisis is a clear illustration of the resource curse and the interplay between primary mineral resources and political instability. This is illustrated very clearly in the chart that you can see on the screen. Along the x-axis, along the bottom, you can see a political stability index with countries with a negative rating calculated as being much more politically unstable than those with a positive rating. And along the y-axis, on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage of global production of critical minerals that each different country accounts for. And there appears to be quite a strong correlation between countries that account for a large proportion of critical mineral production and political instability in those countries. And the DRC in the top left corner perhaps is the preeminent example of such a country, illustrating the resource curse. Jimmy Munguriek, a lawyer and country director in the DRC for the NGO Resource Matters, states that minerals can be the cause of political instability. For example, the conflicts between Rwanda and the DRC are notably linked to coltan mining. Indeed, the Rwandan government is seen to be deeply implicated in the activities of M23 and profiting financially from their control of mineral-rich regions in the east of the DRC. In 2024, the UN estimated that 4,000 Rwandan troops were fighting with the M23 rebels and that the Rwandan army was in de facto control of M23, although this is denied by the Rwandan government. At least 150 metric tons of coltan with a taxable value of $800,000 a month is extracted from the Rubaya mine and fraudulently exported to Rwanda. There it is then mixed with the domestic supply to circumvent the Tin Supply Chain Initiative, the ITSCI, which tries to ensure a more responsible supply chain of raw materials free from involvement of armed groups and child labour. The UN describes what is happening as the largest contamination of mineral supply chains in the Great Lakes region recorded to date. The graph on the screen lends further credence to the view that Rwanda is implicated in this transfer of critical minerals. There seems to be a very clear overlap between renewed M23 activity in the eastern regions of the DRC and the growth in tantalum production alleged to be emanating from Rwanda. Perhaps a further sign of Rwanda's involvement is that on the 27th of June 2025, the DRC signed a peace deal in Washington in an attempt to halt the conflict, but a peace deal that they signed not with the M23 group, but with Rwanda. The peace deal demands that Rwanda disengages its forces, that both countries refrain from supporting armed groups, and that they both refrain from acts of aggression. But the absence of M23's involvement is problematic. It isn't stated in the agreement whether M23 will withdraw from all occupied territory in the DRC. Nevertheless, the M23 signed a truce with the DRC government in talks mediated by Qatar in July 2025. But talks and agreements have faltered over the summer with a number of missed deadlines, and there is no current end to the conflict in sight. But why is the US involved? In August 2025, President Trump claimed that he had stopped the decades-long conflict in the darkest, deepest part of Africa, his words. A very patronising statement that evokes memories of Conradian 19th century perceptions of a backward continent. But beyond projecting himself as an international troubleshooter, President Trump sees great commercial and geopolitical opportunities in developing relations with Kinshasa. Preliminary discussions between the respective governments began in March 2025, with the US looking to negotiate a mining partnership which would give them access to the DRC's critical minerals. Geostrategically, this would also allow the US to challenge China's extensive involvement in the Congolese mineral industry. China controls 75 to 80% of all mining operations in the DRC. The DRC is hoping that Western intervention will also put pressure on Rwanda and promote security and stability in the region. However, critics raise questions about the sustainability of such peace for exploitation deals, perpetuating a world systems model where the core benefits at the expense of the periphery. One thing remains certain: the misery and uncertainty for Congolese in the East will continue. Just this week, the M23 have introduced school fees in areas under their control, directly contradicting Felix Tshisekedi's national policy of free education in the Eastern DRC. Such a measure risks depriving the poorest children of a key opportunity to improve their life chances. So this update video about the situation in the DRC with the M23 can be linked to a number of key issues in Theme 2 of the BFI Geography programme on unequal integration and unequal development in a globalised world. The most obvious connection is to use it as a case study to illustrate the ways in which governance and other factors, such as political instability, are a cause of underdevelopment and a lack of integration into the global economy. But as you've seen, there are other actors involved in this, whether it's major world economic powers, TNCs, other African states as well. You could also perhaps connect it to the key issue that looks at integration strategies and evaluate the legitimacy and the value of a sort of minerals deal between primary producers like the DRC and major world economic powers like the USA and China, and whether this is a route to development or simply a continuation of an exploitation model and the resurgence of kind of a neo-colonial attitude to the cause relationship with the periphery. You could also perhaps link it to the key issue that looks at the role of different actors in reducing global inequality and the roles that major world economic powers can play within that process. And there's also scope to link it to the question that explores the extent to which emerging countries, the BRICS countries and China in particular here, are changing the nature of global economic governance, the extent to which they have become a major actor in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in terms of deals with mineral-rich countries. And through the case study we've just looked at, you can see the ways in which the more traditional major world economic powers like the USA are playing a sort of retrospective catch-up game in terms of trying to restore influence within sub-Saharan Africa and to protect their supply chains in an era where we see sort of a regression away from the globalization and free trade that's developed in the second half of the 20th century in this new era of tariffs and restrictions being put in place.